Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of the PF Warriors video series, Lessons Learned, sponsored by FibroGen Incorporated, a leading science-based biopharmaceutical company discovering and developing first-class therapeutics. And I'm Shelley Mathis, the Executive Director of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Warriors International Support Group. This week, we have one of our favorites, Dr. Susan Mathai, to talk to us about staying healthy over the holidays. In fact, those of us in the US are about to start the Thanksgiving holiday, a national holiday here, but around the world, we know that it starts the holiday season very soon for the rest of you. If you don't already know about Dr. Mathai, she's an advanced lung disease and pulmonary transplant physician at Baylor Scott & White in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Mathai, welcome again to Lessons Learned, and thank you for joining us.
No problem. It's good to be here.
Okay, things are already happening this holiday season. We've seen flu and COVID cases and other things happening. Well, most of us soon will be with more people than usual, and the viruses and bacteria will be plentiful. So what are some of the early warning symptoms of catching the latest COVID variant or flu, and what should we do? How many COVID tests should we keep on hand?
Well, I think it's good to have, as always, 2 or 3 COVID tests around, especially when you're going to be having a lot of people around, because in these times, at least in the United States, it's with a lot of people visiting and wanting to test themselves before Thanksgiving dinner, it may be hard to find the COVID tests in local pharmacies. I don't know if that's yet been an issue, but I would not be surprised if in the coming days, some of the at-home COVID tests are going to run low. So I'd probably go ahead and get 2 or 3 on hand. But in terms of the most important thing is, as we kind of get into the holiday season, and it's advice I'm trying to take for myself as well, is that we think about COVID and masking as really important, and sort of there's a lot of association in our world now because of what we've been through for the last few years of COVID and masking. But masking is really a much broader protection for you than just against COVID. So before COVID, we in the kind of physician world, whenever people were presumed or we were concerned about things like influenza, RSV, and other respiratory viruses, we would mask around those patients and on those wards. Those of you who've been through a lung transplant know that we actually recommend wearing a mask and probably depends exactly how long your doctor tells you, may vary from center to center, but at least in the first year, we would recommend people wearing masks in public to protect themselves from viruses. And that was all before COVID. One of the funny things that we saw as physicians during the COVID pandemic is because so many people around the world, and certainly I can speak from the American perspective in the United States, were wearing masks in the kind of heart of the COVID pandemic. We actually saw almost no influenza and other of the common respiratory viruses that we were so accustomed to seeing. And I can say, as a mother of very young children, I had become used to getting sick with some kind of respiratory virus every few weeks with the kids going in and out of daycare. And I remember one of the things that stuck out to me the most about especially that first year of COVID, when they weren't going to school and when we were masking all the time, is that I didn't get sick for a whole year. I didn't get any colds or runny noses and things like that. And it was almost a miracle. So my point in saying that is, we now draw this link in our minds between COVID and masking, but the mask protects you from all these respiratory viruses. And so I would recommend, if you're going to be in crowded places, in rooms of where you don't know, you're not going to be able to control if someone shows up sick or sneezing. If you're comfortable with it and to be kind of maximally protected, wear your mask. Of course, during dinner and things like that, that's going to be harder to do, but wearing a mask and protecting yourself is not zero sum. And so what I mean by that is just because you take off your mask for a few minutes to eat does not erase the protection that you had by wearing the mask earlier in the day, wearing the mask when you were on the airplane or on the train or whatever it is that you had to do to get to your location. So we are hosting Thanksgiving, and we have told our guests that we're completely comfortable with people keeping masks on for whatever part of the evening they would like to wear them for, because there are going to be some of our guests are going to have some health issues, and we want to be respectful of that, and we'll encourage kind of keeping our germs to ourselves.
It's interesting to talk about guests who will be arriving on planes and having been in airports. We did have some guests a few weeks ago who were coming in from different parts of the country. So they were in different airports and planes, and they came with COVID tests, and they took them before they came to our home because they knew my husband was vulnerable. And I thought that was really very lovely of them. So what are the signs that we would see? A lot of times we just wake up and don't feel good,
Yeah.
And so what are some of the signs we might need the test for of this very?
Yeah. So for sure, if you're having a runny nose, that's should tip you off. Fever, of course, absolutely need to get tested for flu and COVID. So fever, runny nose, sore throat. So if you wake up, you can't swallow easily, or you have a super big frog in your throat, those kind of things. And then also really severe fatigue. So a lot of people who've had COVID, one of the biggest, especially now that I'm going to presume a lot of the people watching this are vaccinated, and so may not have some of the really extreme overt symptoms of constant sneezing and difficulty breathing, but may have really like more fatigue, runny nose, sore throat, kind of the mild symptoms that, for instance, like I had when our family had COVID a few months ago, which the kids brought home, of course. And so these are all kind of things where if you start to feel that, and you're going to be around other people, go ahead and test yourself. The most important thing too for the folks that are probably watching this are probably people in the PF community. The other reason to get tested is that we have antivirals, both for flu and for COVID. So if you test positive, you should reach out to your physician. Certainly, even just today, I prescribed some of the antivirals for COVID to a patient of mine just a couple hours ago. And so the antivirals are still effective against the variants that we're seeing out there. So definitely call your physician, get tested, call your physician with any positive results. And it's harder you can't really home test for flu, but there's a lot of influenza going around. And so it's also a good idea to get tested for influenza if you can, so that we can prescribe you the antivirals that are specific to flu if you have that.
That's good to know. Thank you so much. We also, being an international support group, have a lot of patients in very cold climates now. We have some in Canada. Well, we have some in upstate New York, and they got a pretty bad blast of snow this past week. So what should we be doing if we know we're going to be traveling through some very cold weather and need to travel short or long distance? How should we prepare?
For sure, like we talked about, having some COVID tests on hand, knowing how to reach out to your physicians if you find out that you're positive for anything, like so having their phone numbers with you. Cold air can sometimes make our airways more susceptible to viruses. and of all kinds. This is a pre-COVID observation. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is using even just covering your face with a mask, not even just a mask, but even like when you wear scarves and such around your face when you're in really cold weather, it kind of keeps the moisture from your breath closer in and humidifies that air and potentially protects your upper airway from being more sensitive to getting kind of actually contracting, like a virus particle actually getting into your airway and causing trouble. So keeping your face and like head covered in that way can be protective for some people. And so definitely recommend doing that. Washing hands a lot, of course. As Shelley, I'm sure, remembers from earlier, I think before COVID happened, I think I gave a session to the PF Warriors locally, and we talked about if like our house is a no shoe house. So there's no shoes in our house. As soon as guests come, they have to like take off their shoes and leave them by the front door. So you want to keep as many germs out as possible. So you don't want people to track things in. So that's a really important one, especially up north where there's a lot of snow and people bringing in a lot of sludge and things on their boots. So shoes off as soon as people get in, washing hands, and making sure that people have the ability to wash hands before eating. So make that kind of like an easy, make sure people know where the sinks are and have soap and all of that kind of stuff available for them. And again, the more that you can, masking is a really social thing. So it can feel weird to wear a mask when no one else is doing it. But if you're the host, kind of normalizing that, especially when you might have susceptible people with you, can really help protect them and make them feel more comfortable protecting themselves.
Yes, I do remember you talking about taking shoes off before you bring a lot of bacteria and junk into the house. And I would imagine that should be fairly easy for our folks up north who will have snow on their shoes. And
yes,
it's just stranger down here in the South where they'll think we're strange, but we are strange.
You can just tell them I do it and I make everyone do it. So
okay. Good idea. But back to the very vulnerable patients we have in our community, we will be joining more friends and family up close and hugging and all of that. And they may have the adorable little children we all want to hug. So what should we keep in mind when we are with people who want to hug us?
So that's going to be tough because we all love hugs. I think again, part of the reason we probably saw a lot less of these like viruses and things like that is because during especially those first 2 years of the pandemic, we really learned to express ourselves with like elbow bumps and fist bumps. And I think, again, modeling that for other people so that your guests feel comfortable doing that and don't feel like they're being unusual by having a little bit of distance, I think can be really important, because close contact of the breathing in air that somebody else has just breathed out is definitely a risk factor for all kinds of respiratory viruses. So, I certainly don't think we have to go back to the extreme of where we were back in, April of 2020, where we didn't have medications, we didn't have vaccines. And so there was a lot more fear around what was going on. But some of the things that we can take from what we learned in kind of the deeper stages of the COVID pandemic was just how much preventable upper respiratory tract infections there are. And that some things like masking, maybe not 100% of the time, but a decent percent of the time, especially in large groups, and being careful about hand hygiene and giving people a little bit more personal space at times can be really, can really protect us from these annoying colds that when you're healthy are just annoying, but when you have serious lung disease can be more, more of a big deal and can lead to loss of lung function.
Yes, and I have noticed lately that in some of the grocery stores around here, people are wearing their masks a little bit more than before. I think this summer we got down to, I might have been in the 20% who were doing so, and now I see more people masking. Um, Speaking of food and grocery stores, most of us know what a healthy diet should be, but party food, holiday food sometimes comes with more salt and fat and sugar and the adult beverages that we normally don't eat or drink. Any advice on what to do?
I think everything in moderation, I think to say that we're not going to enjoy a little bit of eggnog or Christmas ham or whatever your particular weakness is, you know, we have to take some joy in some of the kind of parts of the holiday season that are not only nostalgic, but honestly pleasurable for us. But I think the important thing is moderation. So most of us know our limits, trying to limit ourselves to where we know we're not going to necessarily either be hungover or feel ill the next day. Just pace yourself, um, give yourself the respect to your body to know that, no, I mean, I can't do the same things that I could 10 years ago, and probably none of us can. And so we just taking really good care to pace yourself, and especially for patients with IPF, reflux can really be a really big issue. And so overeating as opposed to kind of grazing can actually be very not only uncomfortable, but can cause some more issues with esophageal dysmotility. So for ILD patients, for many ILD patients, esophageal dysmotility is a really big deal. So I actually tell my patients, like, really, like the kind of classic Thanksgiving dinner where you sit down and just eat until you can't eat anymore. That's really not a great option. The better thing to kind of model or try to aim for is where you're grazing. So eating small amounts, perhaps like over the course of the day, as opposed to sitting down to one really big meal. And honestly, just from personal, I'm not a big single meal eater. And so that's kind of how I've always approached Thanksgiving, where it's sort of like I have a little bit of the hors d'oeuvres, a little bit of, and like make sure to save room so I can try a couple different desserts. But again, you don't have to eat the whole slice of pie. You don't have to eat the entire wing of the turkey. You can have a little bit and kind of approaching the dinner as like more of a grazing experience as opposed to a big meal will kind of prevent some of the reflux symptoms and esophageal dysmotility stuff that a lot of our community faces.
Yeah, not only are those of us in this community, but other people should keep that in mind, that
Yeah.
heat reflux is not fun. Another thing during this season, we will be around people who have lovely fireplaces going. And sometimes you go outside, there will be a turkey smoking, maybe a fire pit outside, but really, how close should we get to them?
Yeah, I would definitely keep some distance, keep at least 2 or 3 feet away from anything where there's actual smoke. And in those situations, having a mask around would be really helpful. So I would say, even if you may not be planning to wear your mask during dinner or during certain social things, if you think there might be a fire pit or a turkey being smoked or things like that, where there could be particles in the air, it's good to have your mask in your pocket so you can take it out and wear it for those situations to just prevent the big particles from really getting into your airway.
Okay, and also I was thinking about just, with the oxygen on being anywhere near another
Yeah.
barrier. That's scary to me.
Yes, that's a whole other level. Yes, if you are carrying oxygen, for sure. And I think it's totally reasonable to give your hosts a heads up about that. I mean, nobody would, as being a host myself for this week, I would definitely want to know if somebody was going to bring oxygen so that my husband and I make sure that is not a risk to anybody. So the more information you can provide your hosts, the better it is. You're not going to ruin anybody's fun. It's going to be much worse if there is an oxygen and fire incident than if you didn't tell that, if you go ahead and tell them.
Absolutely. And our family, we usually do prepare them in advance, and occasionally we'll say, well, we're coming over, but do you mind taking a COVID test? Because, they're out there working every day and we're not. But there are some members in our community who are so vulnerable that they cannot join family or friends this season and might feel anxious or depressed. Are there any self-soothing tips you can recommend for them?
One of the things that I've always thought is a really great thing to do is when you can't be with other people that you want to be with during the holidays, sometimes taking a little bit of time to do something for other folks who might be lonely or don't have as much this particular holiday can take that need that we all have to care for other people and express care and receive care, can kind of channel that into something where you can feel really great about yourself. So there are different volunteer opportunities that you might be able to participate in, writing letters to for instance, service members and other things can kind of challenge. So when you have that time to kill, if you're not with your family, sort of channeling that energy into something that you care about. And because for as much as you're alone, there's a lot of other folks who are alone and having a really hard holiday too. And sometimes channeling that energy into helping others can also really help yourself, to be honest. And then, of course, doing things that remind you of your own, of perhaps childhood, of earlier days, simpler times before COVID and all of these things. Getting together some old movies that remind you of the holidays, getting some warm cocoa, and then always, reaching out to people, even if you can't be face to face with them, doing Zooms or other things, especially with other relatives or friends that you may not have talked to in a long time. Sometimes when we're lonely, we forget that a lot of people out there are lonely. There may be a friend that you haven't talked to in a long time, then you wonder what they're up to. And this holiday season might be a great time to reconnect with them via phone or Zoom. I had that experience myself during COVID. There are friends that I had not spoken to in a long time, and I just reached out to them because all of us were stuck at home, not doing their normal social things. And the group of us ended up really reconnecting because we were all kind of stuck in our different apartments and houses and just coming home right after work and being more alone than we were used to. So if you feel that, the likelihood that there may be somebody else in your life that feels that too is pretty high. And so take that moment to just text or call or send a postcard or something to a friend that you haven't talked to in a while and potentially rekindle a friendship or a relationship that you hadn't thought of in a while.
And that reminds me too, the people that are listening to this program, that if you're getting together with family and friends, you might reach out to the one that you know has to stay at home because they just can't be out in the weather or with too many people. People who have recently been lung transplanted. So thank you, Dr. Mathai, for this wonderful, wonderful advice for trying to be as healthy and safe during the holidays as you can. And thanks to our sponsor, FibroGen, for making these programs possible. And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Happy holidays, everybody.